The Name 1, 20th of December 1961, Part 1 of 4. Last time I left you with this remark designed to make you feel that my discourse never loses its moorings, i.e., that the importance for us in this research this year is tied to this: that the paradox of repetition compulsion is that you can see a cycle of behaviour emerge, inscribable as such in terms of a resolution of tension, hence between the coupling of need satisfaction, and that nevertheless, whatever the function involved in this cycle, as carnal as you may suppose it to be, the fact remains that what it means as repetition compulsion is that it is there to make emerge, to recall, to make insist something that is nothing other than, in its essence, a signifier, designatable by its function, and especially under this heading, that it inserts into the cycle of its repetitions, always the same in their essence, and hence regarding something that is always the same thing, that it inserts into this difference, distinction, uniqueness. This is because at the beginning something has happened, which is the whole mystery of the trauma, i.e., that once it has produced something that has henceforth taken on form A, that in the behavioural repetition, as complex, as committed as you may suppose it to be in an individual animal, it is only there to make this A sign resurface. Let's say that the behaviour, henceforth, can be expressed as behaviour number such and such. It's this behaviour number such and such, let's say it, a hysterical attack for example, one of the forms with a specific subject are his hysterical attacks. This is what comes out as behaviour number such and such, except that, for the subject, the number has been lost. It is precisely insofar as the number has been lost that he comes out with this behaviour, masked in this function of making the number resurface, behind what one would call the psychology of his attack, behind the apparent motivations. And you know that on this point no one would find it difficult to give the impression of finding a reason. It's an essential characteristic of psychology to always make the shadow of motivation appear. It is hence in this structural apposition of something radically installed with this signifying function in this visceral individuality that we are at in analytic practice. Vorstellungsrepräsentanz. It's here that something is repressed. It's the number such and such that has been lost. Where is the subject in all this? Is he in the real, radical individuality, purely in the patient having the seizure, in the organism henceforth sucked into the effects of it speaks, by the fact that one being amongst others has been called into becoming what Mr. Heidegger called the shepherd of being dragged into the mechanisms of the signifier? Is he at the other extreme identifiable with the signifying game itself? And is the subject not a subject of discourse, in some way uprooted from his visceral immanence, condemned to fly over it, to live in this kind of mirage that results from this doubling that means that everything he lives, not only does he speak it, but that, living it, he lives it through speaking, and that what he lives is already inscribed in an epos, an epic poem, a saga that is woven into everything he does. What we are trying to do this year, if it has any sense, is precisely to show how the function of the subject is articulated, somewhere not at one or other of these poles, playing between both. This is what, after all, as I imagine it, you're pondering, at least I like to think so after these years of seminars, can give you, if only implicitly, as a way of locating. Is that enough to know that the function of the subject is in between the two, between the idealizing effect of the signifying function and this visceral immanence that you readily confuse, I think still, despite my warnings, with the function of the drive? This is precisely what we are engaged in and what we are trying to push further, and also the reason why I thought I had to begin with the Cartesian cogito, in order to make you aware of the field that is the one in which we are going to try to give more precise articulations regarding identification. I spoke to you a few years ago of little Hans. There is in little Hans's story, I think you have stored the memory somewhere, the story of a dream that can be labelled with the title The Crumpled Giraffe. Zerwurzelte Giraffe. This verb zerwurzeln, translated as to crumple, is not a very common word in the German lexicon. If wurzeln is, zerwurzeln is not. Zerwurzeln means to make into a ball. It is indicated in the text of The Crumpled Giraffe Dream that this is a giraffe that, next to a large living giraffe, is a giraffe on paper, and that as such it can be made into a ball. You know all the symbolism that, throughout this case history, comes from the relationship between the giraffe and the little giraffe crumpled on one of its surfaces, conceivable under the other as the diminished giraffe, as the secondary giraffe, as the giraffe that can symbolize a lot of things. If the big giraffe symbolizes the mother, the other giraffe symbolizes the daughter, and the relationship between little Hans and the giraffe, at the point in his analysis that is reached at that particular moment, will readily enough tend to be the incarnation of a lively game of familial rivalries. Hence, I remember the astonishment it wouldn't happen today that I provoked in indicating at that moment, there in the case history of little Hans, and as such, the symbolic dimension enacted through the psychical output of the young subject in regard to this crumpled giraffe. What could be more indicative of the radical difference of the symbolic as such, if not seeing appear as an output, definitely on this point not suggested, for there is no trace at this point of a comparable articulation concerning the indirect function of the symbol, than to see in the case history something that truly incarnates for us and makes an image of the apparition of the symbolic as such in the psychical dialectic. "How on earth did you find that?" one of you kindly said to me after that session. The surprising thing was not that I saw it there, because, with difficulty, it can be indicated more crudely from the material itself. It's that, in relation to this particular material, it can be said that Freud does not himself take heed, does not put all the emphasis that would be apt on this phenomenon of what is materialized, if I may say so, in front of our very eyes. This is why it proves so well the fundamental character of these structural delineations. It's that not to make them, not to point them out, not to articulate them with all the energy that we are capable of. This is a definite side, a definite dimension of these phenomena themselves, that we are in some way condemned to misrecognize them. I am not on this occasion going to re-articulate what it is all about, what is at stake in the case of little Hans. These are things that have been sufficiently published already, and well enough so that you can look them up yourselves. But the function as such, at this critical moment, the one that is determined by his radical separation from the mother's desire in a way, if I may say so, that is without compensation, without recourse, without a way out, is the function, the artifice, that I have shown the phobia to be to you, insofar as it inserts a key signifier as a mechanism that allows the subject to preserve what it concerns for him, i.e. this minimum anchorage as a centering of his being that allows him not to feel himself to be a being that is completely adrift upon a sea of maternal capriciousness. This is what it's about. But what I want to point out at this level here is that in an outcome that is clearly a bit questionable in this instance, I say so all the more given that in everything towards which little Hans has previously been guided, for God knows he is guided, there is nothing in the nature of all that to put him in the vicinity of this kind of elaboration. Little Hans shows us this, in the form of a closed, definitely but exemplary figure, the jump, the passage, the tension between what I began by defining as the two extremities of the subject. The animal subject that represents the mother, but also with its big neck, there's no doubt about it, the mother as this immense phallus of desire, ending in the grazing pecker of this voracious animal. And then the other one, something to do with the surface of a piece of paper. We will come back to this dimension of the surface, something that is not devoid of a hint of subjectivity. For we can clearly see what is at stake here. The big giraffe, as she sees him playing with the little crumpled one, cries out loudly until at last she stops, exhausted from crying. And little Hans, authorizing in some way the taking possession of, the Besitzung of what it concerns, of the mysterious thing that is at stake in this business by sitting on it, Draftsgesetz, this brilliant mechanism must make us realize what it concerns, if it is clearly to do with his fundamental identification, of his self-defense against this original captivation in the world by the mother, as of course no one doubts it to be about when we are doing an elucidation of the phobia. Here we already see this signifying function exemplified. It is exactly here that I want to take pause today, concerning the point of departure of what we have said about identification. The signifying function, insofar as it is the mooring point of something from which the subject constitutes her himself, here it is. This is what is going to make me take pause for a moment today on something that, it seems to me, must completely naturally come to mind, not only because of general logic, but also because of something that you must touch on in your practice. I mean the function of the name. Not the noun in English, the noun as it is grammatically defined, what at school gets called the substantive, but the name, as they say in English, and in German as well, by the way. The two functions are distinct from each other. I would like to say a bit more on this, but you understand the difference well enough. The name in English is the proper noun.